He left his black wife with a cruel, cutting remark. "You're too fat for the life I have now." But what Logan didn't realize was that his betrayal would ignite the transformation of a woman who would one day bring him to his knees, begging for forgiveness. Those weren't just words. They were a deep, soul-slicing wound. A verdict. A condemnation of everything she was. Maya, the woman who had once been the perfect wife, had stood by him when all he had were dreams. She believed in him when the world didn't, worked tirelessly by his side, and sacrificed her own happiness to lift him up. She was the one staying up late to perfect his presentations, the one pulling cash she didn't have just to keep their dates alive, the one cheering silently from the sidelines as he climbed the ladder of success. In return, she was called fat and discarded as if she were a broken object. Their marriage had started like a fairy tale, a simple proposal with a modest ring, a rented suit, and dreams of building a life together. She didn't care about the lack of luxury because love, for her, was about loyalty, hard work, and sacrifice. Logan had nothing but a heart full of ambition. She was proud to walk alongside him on the journey. But as his success grew, so did the distance between them. His career soared while her insecurities grew. She noticed the shift in his attitude, the subtle distancing, the coldness that crept into his eyes whenever he looked at her. And then came the comments. They started as small, dismissive remarks about her weight. "Maybe you should exercise more," he'd say. "Try a salad, Maya. It's lighter." At first, she brushed them off. She convinced herself it was just stress, that he was under pressure, but deep down she knew something was changing. Maya defended him to her friends, telling them he was just going through a phase and that he'd come back around. But the truth was undeniable. Logan didn't want her anymore. She was no longer the woman he wanted by his side. He had found someone else, someone who fit his new image. The day he left her was a gut punch. He didn't even offer her the dignity of an explanation. He handed her divorce papers, told her it was over, and that she was no longer enough. The man she had loved, worked for, and given everything to had discarded her without a second thought. The rain poured down as Maya stood on the street, clutching a small suitcase in her hand, her heart heavier than the bag dragging behind her. She didn't remember walking out of the house or packing the few belongings she could carry. The only thing that remained vivid was the hollow feeling in her chest, the weight of Logan's words, the finality of his departure. It was all so surreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake up from. Her hands trembled as she checked her phone. A message from Logan's lawyer had popped up, a draft of divorce papers attached. It felt like a cruel joke, a reminder that everything she had worked for in their marriage meant nothing to him. Maya found herself at a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. The walls were thin, the air heavy with the smell of bleach. It was a far cry from the luxury she had once known with Logan. But as she stood there, staring at the peeling wallpaper, she realized that this was her reality now. No amount of fancy clothes or luxury cars would shield her from the truth. She was alone, abandoned, and broken. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the pain. The tears she had swallowed for so long finally spilled, and she cried. Cried for the woman she had been, for the woman Logan had loved, and for the woman who now felt utterly worthless. But then something inside her shifted. She was done feeling sorry for herself. The pity, the anger, the disbelief, they would only hold her back. She couldn't let herself stay stuck in this cycle of self-doubt. She had spent years working to support Logan's dreams, sacrificing her own. And now, she was left with nothing but a shattered heart and an empty apartment. But this wasn't the end. No, it was the beginning of something much bigger. It was time for Maya to stop living for someone else and start living for herself. The first step was finding out who she truly was without Logan. She woke up the next day with one thought on her mind: transformation, not just of her body, but of her mind, her soul, her very essence. She didn't know where this would take her, but she knew she couldn't go back to the woman who had begged for Logan's love. She was about to become someone even he would never recognize. On the first morning after her breakup, Maya didn't know where to start. She wandered the streets, her feet sore from the walk, her mind racing with thoughts of what her future could hold. The world felt so big, and yet so small. She had been living in the shadow of Logan's success for so long that she didn't even know where her own path began. As Maya passed a gym, she paused to look inside. A woman was lifting weights, her arms glistening with sweat. She wasn't thin, but she was strong. There was a power in her movements that Maya envied. For a moment she considered walking away, but something kept her rooted to the spot. It wasn't about losing weight, it was about regaining control. She kept walking, her heart racing with a desire to change. As she passed a cafe, the sight of women sipping their morning coffee, chatting and laughing, stirred something inside of her. They looked confident, radiant even. And in that moment, Maya made a promise to herself. She was going to reclaim everything she had lost. Not for Logan, not for anyone, but for herself. She sold her wedding ring, the one thing that had once symbolized her devotion to Logan, and used the money to buy a bus ticket to a new city, a new start, a fresh page. At a women's shelter, Maya began her journey of transformation. She enrolled in a weight loss support group under a new name, shedding not only pounds but also the baggage of her past. Each morning, she walked for miles, her shoes scuffing against the pavement. She didn't care about the pain in her legs or the sweat dripping down her face. Every step was a declaration. I'm done being weak, being small. I'm going to rise. Her body wasn't the only thing changing. Her spirit was awakening. Slowly but surely, Maya was becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Maya's first month at the shelter was tough. The beds were hard, the food was scarce, and the other women around her carried their own burdens. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, Maya felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. She began to wake up early every day, starting with a walk, then a run. At first, she could barely manage a mile, gasping for air and feeling like her body was betraying her. But with each passing day, her strength grew. The gym became her sanctuary. The weights, the sweat, the aching muscles, everything felt like a form of therapy. It wasn't about changing her body for anyone else. It was about reclaiming her power. Each dumbbell lifted, each lap run was a small victory. Maya wasn't just transforming her body, she was taking back control of her life. She replaced her old habits with new ones. Soda became water, takeout turned into salads, and every excuse she once made for herself was replaced with determination. And as the pounds slowly began to melt away, something even more important began to shift, her mindset. Maya no longer looked at herself through Logan's eyes. She didn't need his approval anymore. She didn't need anyone to tell her she was worthy. She knew she was, and that knowledge was more powerful than anything she could have ever hoped for. One afternoon, while browsing online for inspiration, Maya stumbled upon a post about transformation stories. She clicked through images of women who had been through similar struggles. Some had lost weight, others had rebuilt their careers, but they all had one thing in common. They had turned their pain into power. Maya's heart raced as she read through the stories, her resolve hardening with each one. She realized she wasn't alone in this. There were countless women who had been discarded, beaten down, and left to fend for themselves. But these women had risen, and so would she. That night, she sat at the small table in her room and began to write. The first page of her journal read, "This is where I kill the version of me who begged to be loved." It wasn't just a physical transformation, it was a mental and emotional one. Maya was shedding her old self, the one that clung to the past, to Logan's love. The new Maya would not beg, she would build. She sold the few remaining items she owned, scraping together enough money for a small space to call her own. It was a modest apartment, but it was hers, and with it came freedom, the freedom to finally focus on herself, to carve out her own path without the weight of someone else's expectations. Months passed, and Maya's life began to take shape. She found a job at a local health food cafe, not because she needed the money, but because it placed her in a space filled with people who were focused on self-care, fitness, and wellness. It was a place where Maya could learn, observe, and build connections that would eventually help her create something greater. The work was hard and the pay modest, But every day Maya learned something new. She spoke with wellness influencers, entrepreneurs, and businesswomen who shared their stories of success. She listened, observed, and took notes. There was so much she could learn from them, but she also knew that one day she would be the one teaching others. One night, while cleaning the counter, Maya overheard two women talking about an upcoming wellness retreat for women in business. Her ears perked up as they discussed the event, and as soon as she heard the details, her heart raced. This was it, the opportunity she had been waiting for. She knew the retreat was expensive, but that didn't matter. She applied for a scholarship, pouring her story of personal transformation into the application. Weeks later, an email arrived in her inbox. She had been accepted. The retreat was held at a beautiful cabin in the hills outside the city, and it was the first time in a year that Maya had stepped outside the city limits. Surrounded by women who spoke of ambition, business, and growth, Maya soaked up every word. She learned the language of success, the language of business, of branding, of finance. And when the speaker asked for volunteers to share their vision, Maya stood up. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she spoke, her confidence grew. She didn't talk about weight loss. She didn't talk about revenge. She spoke of rising from the ashes of betrayal and building a brand that helped other women do the same. Her speech resonated with the room, and when it ended, there was a standing ovation. Maya didn't need approval from anyone anymore. She knew she had found her calling. After the retreat, Maya returned to the city with a new sense of purpose. She had learned so much, not just about business, but about herself. The retreat had ignited something within her, a vision of what she could achieve, not just for herself, but for other women who had been through what she had. She wasn't going to be just another woman in the wellness industry. She was going to create something different, something raw and real. She started with a blog, using the stories she had gathered from the retreat and her own experiences. The site was called Ember and Rise. It was her way of showing other women that they could rebuild their lives after facing betrayal, heartbreak, or rejection. It wasn't about pretending everything was perfect. It was about being real and showing women that they were not alone. The blog took off faster than she had imagined. Within weeks, she had thousands of visitors. The stories were powerful, and the message was clear: rise from the ashes. Maya's brand wasn't just about weight loss or fitness. It was about emotional resilience, empowerment, and rebuilding one's life from the ground up. She wasn't just helping women feel better about themselves. She was teaching them how to reclaim their power. As her following grew, so did her brand. Maya launched a series of motivational videos, speaking from the heart about overcoming adversity and taking control of your life. The videos were raw, unpolished, and real. The authenticity resonated with women everywhere, and soon influencers in the wellness space were reaching out to collaborate. This wasn't just a business, it was a movement. While Ember and Rise was gaining momentum, Logan's company, VitaCore, was struggling. He had launched a health-focused tech startup that promised to revolutionize the fitness industry with curated fitness content through a sleek app. But the app's user retention rates were low, and complaints about its lack of depth began flooding the customer service lines. Logan's glossy marketing couldn't hide the cracks in the foundation. Maya, however, didn't see this as an opportunity to gloat. She wasn't interested in ruining Logan. What mattered now was the space she was creating. But as she watched VitaCore falter, she noticed a gap in the market. The gap was clear. VitaCore had failed to connect with women on a deeper level. It was all surface-level fitness and superficial empowerment. Maya knew that her platform, with its focus on real stories and emotional resilience, was filling that gap. She began to quietly study Logan's business, not out of bitterness, but out of strategy. Her brand was growing at a steady pace while VitaCore's metrics continued to dip. Slowly, she began to pull a portion of Logan's audience, women who had once been drawn to his flashy marketing but now craved something real. Ember and Rise was a truth they could believe in. 1 year had passed since Maya had walked away from her life with Logan. She had transformed her pain into power, and now she was standing on the precipice of something huge. Ember and Rise had expanded into a full-fledged company with a small team of women who shared her mission. She had moved into a small but elegant apartment, and her days were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and content creation. But there was one thing left undone. Maya needed closure not for her, but for him. The man who had discarded her, the one who never believed in her, was still out there. He had seen her success, but he hadn't fully realized the impact of his actions. It was time for their paths to cross once more. The annual Women's Wellness Gala was coming up, and Maya was invited as a featured speaker. She knew Logan would be there, and so she made her plan. As Maya walked into the ballroom that night, she felt the eyes of the room on her. Photographers snapped her picture. Influencers and business leaders whispered as she passed. She was no longer the woman who had been discarded. She was a force. When Logan saw her, he froze. The shock on his face was evident, and for a brief moment, he seemed smaller, more fragile. He had spent the last year rebuilding his company, trying to recapture his former glory. But all of that paled in comparison to Maya's growth. She didn't smile at him. She didn't need to. He had already seen the woman he had rejected, and now he was witnessing her rise. The following months were a blur of growth and opportunity. Maya's platform, Ember and Rise, continued to expand. She hired a small team of dedicated women who shared her vision, and they created courses, hosted workshops, and built a community where women could come together to support one another in their journeys of healing and empowerment. She received invitations to speak at international conferences, and her face graced the covers of magazines. But it wasn't the accolades that mattered. It was the messages that flooded her inbox every day from women who had found the strength to leave toxic relationships, quit soul-sucking jobs, and take control of their lives. One day, as Maya sat in her office, Zara, her strategist, handed her a document. It was a merger proposal from Vidacor. Logan, in a final act of desperation, had offered to merge with Ember and Rise in an attempt to save his floundering company. But Maya wasn't interested in saving him. She had already outgrown him. She looked at the proposal and smiled faintly. "Set the meeting," she told Zara. When she walked into the Vidacor offices, she did so with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly what she had built. Logan was there, a shadow of the man he once was. The meeting was short and to the point. Maya took control of the situation, outlining her terms and demands with confidence. Logan, once the man who had discarded her, was now at her mercy. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The man who had once told her she didn't fit in his world now worked under her. She had built her empire from the ground up, and she had done it without his help. She had outgrown him completely, and now he would have to watch as she soared higher than he ever could. As she left the office that day, Maya realized she had done more than just rebuild her life. She had built a kingdom. And the best part? She had done it all without ever needing Logan's approval. If you've ever been underestimated or left behind, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to witness the power of transformation. Don't miss the journey to revenge and redemption.